My name is Alex, and I've always been drawn to the forgotten corners of the world. Not in a historical society kind of way, though I appreciate a good artifact as much as the next person. My fascination lies more in the raw, untamed places, the spots where nature has begun to reclaim what was once built or used by human hands. It's in these spaces, I believe, that the echoes of the past are loudest, and sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can hear whispers of things long gone. This particular obsession of mine often leads me and my two closest friends, Chris and Sarah, on what we jokingly call urban exploration. Trips, it's not always urban, mind you. Sometimes it's deep in the woods. Other times it's in abandoned industrial complexes miles outside the city. The thrill isn't just in the exploration itself, but in the unexpected discoveries we sometimes make. We found old journals, forgotten photographs, even once stumbled upon a perfectly preserved vintage car hidden away in a dilapidated barn. Each find tells a story, a silent testament to a life lived or a moment in time that has faded from collective memory. Chris is the pragmatic one of our trio. He's an engineer by trade, with a sharp mind for logic and a healthy dose of skepticism. He often acts as our voice of reason, grounding my more impulsive ideas and Sarah's sometimes overly enthusiastic leaps of faith. But beneath his practical exterior lies a genuine sense of adventure, a curiosity that matches our own, even if he expresses it with a bit more caution. He's the one who meticulously researches locations beforehand, looking for historical records or local legends that might hint at interesting places to explore. Sarah, on the other hand, is the artist. She sees the world through a different lens, finding beauty and intrigue in the decay and the overlooked. She's a photographer, and her camera is her constant companion, capturing the textures, the light, and the shadows of the places we visit. She has an uncanny ability to find the perfect angle, the shot that tells a story without words. Sarah is also the most open to the possibility of the unknown, the unexplained. While Chris might scoff at ghost stories, Sarah is the one who leans in, apparently, her eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and a healthy dose of apprehension. Our latest adventure began with a rumor, a hushed whisper I'd overheard at a local antique shop. An old-timer, a man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of stories, had mentioned an unusual anomaly found years ago in the sprawling, mostly undeveloped land just outside our town. He spoke of a stone door, buried deep beneath the earth, discovered by a group of teenagers exploring a network of old, forgotten drainage tunnels. He claimed the teenagers, spooked by what they found, had quickly covered it back up and never spoken of again. Now, usually, I'd take such a story with a grain of salt. Local folklore is often more fiction than fact. But something about the way the old man spoke, the genuine unease in his voice, sparked my interest. I did some digging, cross-referencing old local news articles and historical society records. There was no mention of any such discovery, which only made the story more intriguing. It felt like a secret, something deliberately buried and forgotten. I pitched the idea to Chris and Sarah over our usual Saturday morning breakfast at the local diner. Chris, as expected, was skeptical. A buried door. Sounds like an urban legend to me, Alex. Teenagers probably saw a rock formation and their imaginations ran wild. Sarah, however, was immediately hooked. A secret door underground. That sounds incredible. What do you think was behind it? Her eyes were already shining with excitement. That's the million-dollar question, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. The old guy said it was deep, and it looked ancient. He didn't know what was behind it, only that the kids who found it were freaked out. Chris sighed. "And of course you want us to go digging for it." "Well, not literally digging," I clarified. The old man gave me a general area of where the tunnels were supposed to be. They were part of an old, failed development project from decades ago, supposedly abandoned and mostly sealed off. But he mentioned a few access points that might still be open. After a bit more persuasion, and perhaps swayed by Sarah's infectious enthusiasm, Chris reluctantly agreed. His engineering background, he admitted, made him curious about the structural integrity of such an old tunnel system. So, armed with the old man's vague directions, some topographical maps I'd managed to find online, and our usual assortment of flashlights, ropes, and basic safety gear, we set off the following weekend. The area was a mix of overground fields and patches of dense woodland, the remnants of the failed development slowly being swallowed by nature. Victims were apparently eaten. It took us the better part of the morning to locate what we believed to be the entrance to the old drainage system. It was hidden beneath a thick tangle of vines and overgrown bushes, a crumbling concrete opening barely visible. The air inside the tunnel was immediately cooler, carrying the damp, earthy smell of old concrete and stagnant water. It was dark, the only light coming from our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The tunnel was surprisingly spacious at first, tall enough for us to walk upright, though the floor was uneven and littered with debris. As we ventured deeper, were apparently eaten, the tunnel narrowed and the ceiling lowered, forcing us to hunch over in places. The silence was heavy, broken only by the echo of our footsteps and the occasional drip of water. We explored for what felt like hours, following the winding path of the tunnel system. There were several offshoots and smaller passages, most of which seemed to lead to dead ends, or were too narrow to navigate. Just as we were starting to feel like the old man's story was indeed just a legend, we reached a section of the tunnel that felt different. The air grew noticeably colder, and there was a faint, almost metallic scent in the air. The walls here were smoother, the concrete replaced by large, crudely hewn stones that seemed much older than the rest of the tunnel. The tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the beams of our flashlights, was exactly what the old man had described as a stone door. It was set flush into the floor, a large, circular slab of dark, gray stone with no visible hinges or handles. It looked ancient, the surface worn smooth by time and the elements. There were strange, intricate carvings etched into the stone, symbols that none of us recognized. They seemed alien, out of place in this forgotten corner of the earth. A wave of awe, mixed with a growing sense of unease, washed over me. It was real. The buried door was real. Chris, ever the pragmatist, knelt down and examined the stone. "This is incredible," he muttered, running his hand over the smooth surface. "The stonework looks incredibly old, older than anything else we've seen in these tunnels." Sarah was circling the door slowly, her camera clicking softly as she documented every detail. "What do you think is underneath?" she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. That was the question that hung heavy in the air. What was the purpose of this door, buried so deep underground? And why had the teenagers who found it been so frightened? We tried to find a way to open it, pushing and pulling at the edges, but the door remained stubbornly sealed. There were no visible mechanisms, no obvious way to lift or slide it open. It was as if it was meant to remain closed, a secret locked away beneath the earth. As the initial excitement began to wear off, a sense of unease settled upon us. The air in the chamber felt heavy, almost oppressive. The silence seemed to press in on us, amplifying the sound of our own breathing. There was something about this place, something ancient and unknown, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Maybe we should just leave it," Chris said finally, his voice hesitant. "Maybe it's better not to know what's down there." For a moment, I considered it. Chris was right. There was a palpable sense of wrongness about this place, a feeling that we had stumbled upon something that was not meant to be found. But the curiosity, the burning desire to know what lay behind that stone door, was too strong to ignore. "We've come this far," I said, my voice firm despite the knot of apprehension in my stomach. "We have to try and open it." Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Chris sighed again, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes as well. "All right," he said, "but let's be careful. We have no idea what we're dealing with here." We spent the next hour trying different methods to open the door. We used our tools to try and pry at the edges, but the stone was immovably set. We examined the carvings, looking for any kind of clue, any hint of a mechanism. But the symbols remained enigmatic, offering no answers. Just as we were starting to feel defeated, Sarah noticed something we had overlooked. Along the edge of the door, almost hidden beneath a layer of grime, was a series of small indentations arranged in a circular pattern. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing her flashlight at the indentations. "They look like slots." We examined them closely. There were 5 of them, evenly spaced around the circumference of the door. They were just large enough to fit a small, cylindrical object. "Keys," Sarah wondered aloud. Could it be some kind of lock? It seemed plausible. An ancient locking mechanism hidden in plain sight. The question now was, what kind of key would fit these slots? And where would we find them? The realization that we were potentially dealing with something incredibly old, something that might have been deliberately sealed away for a reason, sent a fresh wave of unease through me. But the allure of the unknown, the possibility of uncovering a secret lost to time, was too powerful to resist. We had found the door. Now, we had to know what lay behind it. Victims apparently eaten, and I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was something that truly shouldn't exist. The discovery of the indentations along the edge of the stone door sparked a renewed sense of purpose, a tangible puzzle to solve in the face of the overwhelming mystery. We immediately began rummaging through our backpacks, pulling out anything that might remotely fit the small circular slots. We tried our pens, the tips of our multi-tools, even the small LED flashlights we carried. None of them were the right size or shape. Some were too thick, others too thin. And none seemed to fit the depth of the indentations. "Maybe they're not meant for keys in the traditional sense," Sarah mused, running her finger along the edge of one of the slots. "Maybe they're more like pressure points. Or maybe something needs to be inserted in a specific order." Chris, ever the engineer, was examining the indentations with his flashlight, his brow furrowed in concentration. They seemed too uniform for pressure points. And there's definitely a depth to them, like something is meant to be inserted and held in place. He tapped one of the slots thoughtfully. The spacing is also interesting. 5 of them, evenly distributed. It feels deliberate. We spent a good half-hour experimenting. Victims were apparently eaten, trying different combinations of pressure and attempting to insert various small objects we found on the floor of the chamber, loose pebbles. Small shards of rock, but nothing seemed to trigger any kind of response from the stone door. It remained as inert and unyielding as ever. Frustration began to creep in. We had come so far, faced our initial skepticism, and the unsettling atmosphere of the tunnels, only to be met with a locked door and no apparent way to open it. The silence of the chamber, once just heavy, now felt almost mocking, as if the ancient guardians of this place were amused by our futile attempts. Okay, let's think about this logically, Chris said, finally standing up and dusting off his knees. We know this door is old, possibly very old. Whatever locking mechanism it has is likely to be equally archaic. Think about ancient locks. What did they typically involve? Tumblers, I suggested. Or maybe some kind of sliding bolt. Possibly, Chris replied. But these indentations don't really suggest either of those. They're too small and too numerous for simple tumblers, and there's no visible slot for a bolt to slide into. Sarah walked slowly around the chamber, her flashlight beam dancing across the stone walls. Maybe the keys aren't on the door itself, she said, her voice thoughtful, apparently eaten. Maybe they're somewhere else in this chamber. The thought hadn't occurred to me. We had been so focused on the door itself that we hadn't really paid much attention to the rest of the small, circular room. It was relatively bare, the walls made of the same rough, hewn stone as the tunnel leading in. There was a thin layer of dust and grime covering everything, and a few scattered rocks lay on the floor. We began a more thorough search of the chamber, our flashlights illuminating every nook and cranny. We ran our hands along the cold, damp stone walls, feeling for any hidden levers or mechanisms. We carefully examined the floor, were apparently eaten, hoping to find some kind of object that might fit the indentations on the door. The search yielded nothing. The chamber seemed deliberately devoid of any other features besides the door itself. The silence remained unbroken, save for our own movements and hushed whispers. The air felt colder than before, a subtle shift that sent a shiver down my spine. "This is getting us nowhere," I said, a hint of discouragement in my voice. Maybe the old man was wrong. Maybe the teenagers just imagined the whole thing. Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, Alex. We saw the door. It's real. And those indentations have to mean something." She knelt back down in front of the door, her gaze fixed on the strange carvings etched into the stone. Maybe the symbols have a clue. We all gathered around the door again, carefully examining the intricate patterns. They were a mix of geometric shapes and stylized figures, unlike anything I had ever seen. Some resembled celestial bodies, stars, moons, perhaps even constellations. Others were more abstract, swirling lines and interconnected circles. And then there were the figures, vaguely humanoid, but with elongated limbs and strangely shaped heads. They seemed to be depicted in various poses, some reaching towards the sky, others huddled together as if in fear. "Do you recognize any of these?" I asked Chris, who had a passing interest in ancient history and mythology. He shook his head. "No, they're not familiar. It's not any language or iconography I've ever seen. It looks older. Much older." Sarah took several photographs of the carvings, zooming in on the details. "Maybe I can try to find something online later," she said. "See if any of these symbols match anything in ancient texts or archaeological findings." While Sarah continued to photograph the door, I ran my hand over one of the carvings, a depiction of a figure with multiple arms reaching towards a central, star-like symbol. As my fingers traced the lines of the carving, I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingertips, a subtle hum that seemed to resonate through the stone. I pulled my hand back quickly, startled. "Did you guys feel that?" I asked, looking at Chris and Sarah. They both looked at me, their expressions questioning. "Feel what?" Chris asked. A vibration, like a faint humming in the stone. They both placed their hands on the door where I had touched it, but neither of them felt anything. I don't feel anything, Alex, Chris said after a moment. Me neither, Sarah echoed. Maybe it was just your imagination. I wasn't so sure. The feeling had been distinct, a subtle but undeniable vibration. Was it possible that touching the carvings in a certain way could trigger something? I tried again, placing my hand on the same carving. This time, the vibration was stronger, accompanied by a faint clicking sound from somewhere within the stone. There! I exclaimed. Did you hear that? Chris and Sarah both nodded. Yeah, I heard it that time, Chris said, his eyes widening slightly. What do you think it means? We began systematically touching each of the carvings, trying to see if any of them produced a similar reaction. Most of them remained inert, but when Sarah touched a carving of a crescent moon, we heard another faint click, and when Chris touched a carving of a swirling spiral, a third click followed. A pattern was emerging. It seemed that certain carvings, when touched, were triggering some kind of internal mechanism within the door. Could these carvings be the keys we were looking for? There are 5 indentations, Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. And we found 3 carvings that react. Maybe we need to find 2 more. We continued our exploration of the carvings, carefully touching each one. It took us another 10 minutes, but eventually, we found the remaining 2. Touching a carving of a stylized eye produced the 4th click, and touching a carving of a figure with its hands clasped together resulted in the 5th and final click. As the last click echoed through the silent chamber, a low grinding sound emanated from the stone door. We all held our breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. The circular slab of stone began to rotate slowly, a thin line of darkness appearing where it had once been seamlessly joined to the floor. Dust and a musty, ancient smell wafted up from the opening as the door continued to turn, revealing a dark, gaping hole leading down into the unknown. The grinding sound stopped, and the stone door came to rest, revealing a circular staircase spiraling down into the darkness. A wave of triumph washed over us, quickly followed by a surge of apprehension. We had done it. We had opened the door. But now, staring into the black abyss below, the question that had been lingering in the back of our minds came rushing to the forefront. What awaited us in the darkness? The air coming from the opening felt different, colder and heavier, carrying a faint, metallic tang that made my nostrils tingle. There was also a subtle undercurrent of something else, something indescribable, something that felt wrong. It was a primal feeling, a sense of danger that whispered in the back of my mind, urging me to turn back. Chris shone his flashlight down into the opening, the beam disappearing into the inky blackness. It looks like a long way down, he said, his voice a little shaky. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. What do you think is down there? She whispered. I didn't know. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. An ancient tomb, a forgotten storage chamber, but the unsettling feeling in the air, the strange carvings on the door, the very fact that this place had been deliberately buried and hitting it all pointed to something far more mysterious and potentially far more sinister. Despite the growing sense of unease, the lure of the unknown was too strong to resist. We had come too far to turn back now. We had to know what lay at the bottom of that staircase. We go down, I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. But we stick together, and we're ready for anything. Chris and Sarah exchanged nervous glances, but they both nodded in agreement. Sarah grabbed her camera, making sure the flash was working. Chris double-checked his flashlight and the small first aid kit he always carried. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the growing sense of dread in my stomach. One by one, we stepped onto the first step of the ancient staircase, the stone cold and rough beneath our feet. As we began our descent into the darkness, the stone door above us silently began to rotate back into place, sealing us in the darkness below. The faint light from the chamber above disappeared, and we were plunged into absolute blackness, apparently eaten. The beams of our flashlights the only thing separating us from the unknown horrors that might lie ahead. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger. We're apparently eaten, and the feeling of wrongness intensified, a silent warning that echoed in the darkness. What lies below should not exist. The darkness that enveloped us as the stone door sealed shut above was absolute, a thick, suffocating void that swallowed the light from our flashlights. The only sounds were the echoes of our footsteps on the stone stairs and the sound of our own breathing, amplified in the oppressive silence. The air was heavy, the metallic scent now almost overpowering, mixed with a damp, earthy odor that spoke of centuries of undisturbed stillness. The staircase spiraled downwards relentlessly, each step worn smooth by time and unseen feet. The stone was cold and damp beneath our boots, and the walls of the stairwell were rough and uneven, occasionally brushing against our shoulders as we descended. There was no railing, and the spiral was tight enough that we had to watch our footing carefully to avoid tripping and falling into the darkness. As we went deeper, the temperature continued to drop, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into our clothes and made our teeth chatter. The silence seemed to press in on us, apparently eaten, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes were observing our every move from the surrounding darkness. "How far down do you think this goes?" Sarah whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the stairwell. "I have no idea," Chris replied, his voice strained. "Feels like we've been walking for ages." It did feel like an eternity. Each step we took seemed to lead us further away from the world we knew, deeper into the heart of the earth and whatever secrets it held. The beam of my flashlight danced nervously on the stone steps ahead, revealing nothing but more of the same endless descent. Just as I was starting to wonder if the staircase would ever end, I saw a faint glimmer of light in the distance below. It was a weak, flickering light, but after the absolute darkness of the stairwell, it looked like a beacon. "I see something!" I exclaimed, pointing my flashlight towards the light. Chris and Sarah followed my gaze, their faces lighting up with a mixture of relief and anticipation. We quickened our pace, the steps becoming less steep as the staircase finally began to level out. The staircase opened into another chamber, much larger than the one above. The flickering light came from several strange, glowing crystals embedded in the walls and ceiling of the chamber. They emitted a soft, ethereal light, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on our eyes. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in the gloom above. The walls were made of the same rough, hewn stone as the stairwell, but here they were covered in more of the strange, intricate carvings we had seen on the door above. These carvings, however, were much more extensive and detailed, depicting scenes that were both fascinating and deeply disturbing. Many of the carvings showed the same elongated figures we had seen before, but here they were engaged in various activities. Some appeared to be performing strange rituals, their arms raised towards the glowing crystals above. Others were interacting with bizarre, unidentifiable creatures, some of which seemed to be part animal, part plant, and part something else entirely. There were also depictions of what looked like advanced technology, intricate machines and devices that seemed far beyond anything that should have existed in ancient times. It was a bewildering and unsettling sight, a glimpse into a history that defied explanation. In the center of the chamber was a large, circular platform made of the same dark gray stone as the door above. On the platform lay several objects as strange, geometric devices made of an unknown metal, were apparently eaten, intricately carved boxes, and what appeared to be some kind of skeletal remains, though the bones were unlike anything human. The air in this chamber was different from the stairwell. It was still cold, but the metallic scent was less overpowering, replaced by a faint, sweet odor that was almost sickeningly cloying. There was also a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the glowing crystals, a subtle vibration that we could feel in our bones. We moved cautiously into the chamber, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, illuminating the bizarre surroundings. The silence here was broken only by the low hum of the crystals and the soft crunch of our boots on the dusty stone floor. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe and a hint of fear. "It's like something out of a dream, or a nightmare," Chris added, his eyes scanning the disturbing carvings on the walls. "This doesn't feel right." "Not at all." We approached the circular platform slowly, our curiosity warring with our growing unease. The objects on the platform were even stranger up close. The metallic devices were covered in intricate symbols that matched some of the carvings on the walls. The carved boxes were made of a dark, polished wood that seemed to absorb the light. And the skeletal remains, they were truly unsettling. The skulls were elongated and lacked any discernible eye sockets, and the limbs were far too long and slender to belong to any human. As I reached out to examine one of the metallic devices, I noticed something else on the platform, something that had been partially hidden beneath one of the carved boxes. It was a book bound in a dark, leathery material that felt strangely cold to touch. There were no markings on the cover, but as I carefully lifted it, I could see that the pages were filled with the same strange symbols that adorned the walls and the metallic devices. "Look at this," I said, showing the book to Chris and Sarah. "It's like some kind of ancient text." Chris leaned in for a closer look. "Can you read any of it?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. It's nothing like any language I've ever seen." Sarah took a picture of the book with her camera. "Maybe we can try to decipher it later," she said. "We're apparently eaten." As I flipped through the pages of the book, I noticed a series of illustrations interspersed among the text. These illustrations were even more disturbing than the carvings on the walls. They depicted grotesque creatures, bizarre rituals, and scenes of unimaginable horror. One illustration showed the elongated figures interacting with beings that seemed to be composed of pure shadow, their forms shifting and writhing in the darkness. Another depicted a massive, tentacled entity rising from a dark abyss, its many eyes filled with malevolent intelligence. A wave of nausea washed over me as I stared at the horrifying images. This was not just an ancient civilization. This felt like something else. Something alien. Something that had no place in our world. Suddenly, we heard a sound that made us all jump. It was a faint scraping noise. We're apparently eaten, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the platform. We all froze, our flashlights snapping towards the source of the sound. The darkness beyond the platform was deep and impenetrable, the soft glow of the crystals not reaching that far. We held our breath, listening intently. The scraping noise came again, closer this time, followed by a low, guttural growl. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my curiosity. We are not alone down here. What was that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Chris replied, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife he carried in his belt. But I don't think we want to find out. The growling came again, louder this time, accompanied by a shuffling sound, as if something large was moving in the darkness. The air in the chamber suddenly felt heavy, charged with a palpable sense of menace. We backed away slowly from the platform, our flashlights scanning the darkness, trying to locate the source of the sounds. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, playing tricks on our eyes, making it impossible to discern what was moving in the gloom. Then we saw it. Two glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by a low, sleek form that moved with an unnerving speed. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was vaguely reptilian, but with elongated limbs and sharp, clawed hands. Its head was small and triangular, with rows of razor-sharp teeth visible in its gaping maw. The creature lunged at us from the darkness, its red eyes burning with predatory hunger. We scrambled back, our flashlights momentarily blinding the creature. It hissed, a high-pitched, chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. Run, I yelled, pushing Sarah behind me. We turned and fled, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we stumbled across the uneven floor of the chamber. The creature was fast, its claws clicking on the stone as it pursued us. We could hear its heavy breathing and the snapping of its jaws as it closed in. We didn't know where we were going. Our only instinct was to get away from the terrifying creature that was chasing us. We ran blindly through the darkness, the glowing crystals casting eerie shadows that danced around us like mocking spirits. We reached the base of the staircase and scrambled upwards, our legs burning with exertion. The creature was right behind us, its guttural growls echoing in the narrow stairwell. Were apparently eaten. We could feel its hot breath on our heels as it tried to snap at us. We didn't dare to look back, our focus solely on reaching the top of the stairs and the relative safety of the upper chamber. The grinding sound started again, and we looked up to see the stone door slowly rotating shut, sealing us in the darkness with the creature that was hunting us. We were trapped in the abyss with something that should not exist. The closing of the stone door above us was a death sentence. The grinding sound echoed in the narrow stairwell, each rotation of the massive stone slab severing our last hope of escape. We were trapped in the darkness with a creature that was clearly not of this world. Its guttural growls and the scraping of its claws on the stone steps behind us a constant reminder of the imminent danger. We scramble upwards with renewed desperation, our legs pumping like pistons, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror. The spiral staircase seemed endless, each step a painful reminder of our folly. The creature was relentless, its heavy breathing growing louder as it gained on us. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. I whipped my head around, my flashlight beam catching a glimpse of the creature as it lunged. Its razor-sharp claws snagged on Sarah's backpack, ripping a large gash in the fabric. She stumbled, nearly falling down the stairs, but Chris grabbed her arm, pulling her upwards. Keep going, he yelled, his voice strained with effort and fear. Don't stop. We continued our frantic climb, the image of the creature's red eyes and snapping jaws seared into my mind. The air was thick with the creature's foul breath, and the metallic scent seemed to intensify, making me gag. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the top of the staircase and burst back into the upper chamber with the glowing crystals. The ethereal light cast long, distorted shadows, making the already unsettling chamber feel even more menacing. We turned to see if the creature had followed us, but the stairwell below remained dark and silent, apparently eaten. For a moment, we dared to hope that it hadn't been able to squeeze through the opening. But then we heard a sickening scraping sound as something large and heavy began to ascend the stairs. We rushed to the stone door, desperately trying to find a way to reopen it. We pushed and pulled at the edges, trying to find the carvings we had touched before, but in our panic, we couldn't remember the correct sequence. The door remained stubbornly sealed, an impassable barrier between us and the world above. "It's no use," Chris yelled, his voice filled with despair. "We're trapped." The scraping sound from the stairwell was getting closer. We could hear the creature's heavy breathing just below the opening. We knew it wouldn't be long before it reached us. Panic began to set in. We were trapped in an ancient, underground chamber with a monstrous creature and no way out. The glowing crystals cast an eerie light on our faces, highlighting our fear and desperation. "We have to find another way out," I shouted, my voice echoing in the chamber. "There has to be something." We frantically scanned the chamber, our flashlights darting across the walls, desperately searching for another passage or any sign of an exit. The carvings on the walls seemed to mock us, their strange figures and alien symbols offering no solace. We noticed a narrow passage leading off from the main chamber, hidden behind a cluster of the glowing crystals. It was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through, but it was our only hope. "This way," I yelled, pointing towards the passage. We squeezed through the narrow opening, the rough stones scraping against our skin. The passage was dark and cramped, the air thick with dust and the cloying sweet odor we had smelled in the lower chamber. We could still hear the creature behind us, its growls and the scraping of its claws echoing through the stone. The passage twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the earth. The darkness was absolute. We're apparently eaten, our flashlights the only things guiding our way. The walls were close and suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crawling into the belly of some ancient beast. After what felt like an agonizingly long time, the passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first one. This chamber was completely bare, with no carvings on the walls and no glowing crystals to illuminate it. The only light came from our flashlights, revealing a circular hole in the floor in the center of the room. The hole looked like some kind of ancient well, its depths shrouded in darkness. The air around it was noticeably colder, and the metallic scent was almost unbearable here. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, apparently eaten, her voice barely audible. Before either Chris or I could answer, we heard the creature behind us. It had followed us through the narrow passage and was now emerging into the chamber, its red eyes glowing menacingly in the darkness. We were cornered. The creature was blocking the passage behind us, and the only other option was the dark hole in the floor. "We have to jump," I yelled, my voice filled with desperation. Chris looked at the hole, his face pale in the beam of my flashlight. "Are you crazy? We don't know how deep that is." "We don't have a choice," I replied. As the creature took a step towards us, its claws extended. Without hesitation, I jumped into the hole, plunging into the absolute darkness below. I fell for what felt like an eternity, the air rushing past me. Then, with a sickening thud, I landed on something soft and yielding. I gasped for breath, my body aching from the impact. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The beam of light revealed that I had landed in a pile of bones. Human bones. hundreds of them, piled high in a dark, underground cavern. The sight was horrifying, a macabre testament to the fate of those who had come before us. I scrambled to my feet, my mind reeling from the gruesome discovery. Then, I heard Chris and Sarah land beside me, their faces pale and drawn in the beam of their flashlights. They had seen the bones too, and the horror of our situation was etched on their faces. But the horror wasn't over. From the darkness above, we heard the creature hiss, its red eyes glowing in the opening of the hole. It was coming down after us. We had escaped one nightmare only to fall into another. We were trapped in a cavern filled with the remains of the dead, with a monstrous creature closing in on us. Our flashlights were our only weapons, our hope dwindling with each passing moment. As the creature began its descent into the cavern, we huddled together, our fear reaching a fever pitch. We knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever awaited us in this subterranean abyss was far beyond our comprehension, a horror that should never have been unearthed. The air grew colder, the stench of death filled our nostrils, and the darkness seemed to press in on us, promising a fate far worse than we could ever have imagined. Victims were apparently eaten. Our adventure into the forgotten corners of the world had led us to a place where nightmares were real, and where the door we had found buried deep underground had opened a gateway to something that truly shouldn't exist. And now, we were about to face the consequences, the final, terrifying consequence.